If you're ready to sign up for your first ever HYROX race but don't know how to train for it, here's exactly what my training routine looked like. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Always Active podcast, the show that empowers you to lead an active lifestyle. I'm your host, Katie, and in this episode, I'll be sharing how I trained for my first ever HYROX race. I'll be sharing a little bit of a background on what HYROX is, I'll be sharing my training split, and I'll also share training tips for each of the different exercises. This is the first episode in a three-part series all about how I trained and completed my first HYROX. Throughout this series, I'll be sharing tips to help you get started on your very own HYROX training journey. So I'm super excited for this episode and this series, and without further ado, let's get psyched to move. So to start off, what is HYROX? HYROX is a fitness competition that combines both running and functional exercises. And the format of the race is you run 1 kilometer and then you complete 1 functional exercise and you repeat that 8 times. And the 8 exercises that you complete are the ski erg, sled push, sled pull, burpee broad jumps, rowing, farmer's carry, sandbag lunges, and wall balls. And if any of these terms are new to you, you're not alone because many of these terms were also new to me when I first started training. HYROX is open to all fitness levels and it's accessible to many people. And I remember receiving an email from HYROX right when I first signed up, and it said that 98% of people who sign up finish their first HYROX race, which is encouraging. And they're really just trying to reinforce that this is something that many people can accomplish, and you don't need to be the most athletic or the most fit to be able to compete. The first ever HYROX took place in 2017 in Germany, and it's now hosted in 11 different countries in over 30 different cities. And 2024 was the first time that HYROX was ever hosted in Canada, and specifically it was in Toronto. Recently, HYROX has gained a ton of popularity, and when I was doing research for this episode, I looked on Google Trends to see how often the term HYROX was searched. And worldwide, this term has really become popular in the past couple years, and specifically in Canada in this past year, 2024, is when HYROX really blew up. Before you sign up, you'll have to select the division that you'd like to sign up for. And there are lots of different types of divisions depending on your current fitness level and your preferences. The first one being the open, which is completed individually and you're using the standard HYROX weights. The next one is the pro, which is also completed individually, but you're using heavier weights. Then there's the doubles, which is completed with a partner and you are using the standard weights and dividing the obstacles up between yourself and your partner so you don't have to do it alone. Then there's the mixed doubles where you have a partner, 1 woman, 1 man per team. It uses the standard men's weights, and again, you're splitting up the obstacles between the 2 partners. And then there's the relay, which is more so targeted to corporate groups from my understanding. And on this team, you would have 4 teammates. It uses the standard weights, and then each teammate completes 1/4 of the running and the obstacles. Personally, I'll be speaking from my experience competing in the women's doubles division, and I recommend you check out the HYROX website because they have a quiz to help you determine the level that's most suitable for you, and this is also where they list all of the different weights for each of the different divisions. Now, why did I even sign up for HYROX in the first place? My friend told me about HYROX earlier this year, and she asked if I had ever heard of it, and I hadn't at the time. So I did a little bit of research, and it seemed like a cool new fitness challenge that I could take on. I was really excited, but at the time, I think I took too long, and then day 1 was completely sold out. So I was like, okay, well, I guess it's not in the cards for this year. I'll just sign up for it the next time it comes around. But then they ended up opening up a second day because the first day sold out, which was exciting. So I got on that right away. As soon as they opened up tickets for day 2, I signed up, and I was really excited to take on this new fitness challenge. It would help me to have something to work towards since quitting my last program, which I've talked about many times on this podcast. And before committing to HYROX, I did very minimal research. I just thought, this seems cool. Let's do it, and I'll figure it out along the way. Now, who I signed up with, I joined with my friend Joya, so she was my HYROX women's doubles partner. And when I suggested the idea to her, I was a little bit nervous that she would say no, but she was super down to do it, which I was so grateful for. And then a couple weeks after we signed up, John, as well as Joya's fiance Luca, also signed up, and they signed up together on a team. So they completed the men's doubles division. And this was nice because it was a group of four of us. It felt like we were a team, and it was accountability to actually work toward this goal and train together. In terms of my starting point, I signed up just about 3 months before the actual race date. And in terms of my starting fitness level, if you listen to the podcast, you would know I'm very active. I usually work out about 5 to 6 times per week. I've been lifting weights for over 10 years. And I've been running as an adult for about 3 years now, very intermittently, though. I've never had a long stretch of time where I've been super committed to running. So I would say I had pretty high baseline fitness levels, and I consider myself probably an advanced lifter and maybe an intermediate runner. In terms of my training split, when I asked you over on Instagram if you had any questions about how I trained for HYROX, one of you asked if I followed a training plan. And I actually didn't follow a specific training program, but instead I took my usual hybrid approach to training, which included a variety of different workout types. I focused on strength, endurance, and flexibility, and I really enjoyed this approach to training. And so what my typical weekly workout split looked like for those 3 months, I usually completed 2 weightlifting workouts, so one upper body day, one lower body day, and those were usually done by myself at the gym. My third gym workout was a full body conditioning workout with my HYROX partner Joya, and then I usually did a yoga class once a week. I also was playing soccer once a week during the summer, and then my last workout of the week was usually some sort of miscellaneous workout, so I would either do Pilates or mobility or lifting light weights at home, or I would play golf, go for a hike, go for a walk, just some sort of bonus activity, and it was different depending on the week. So on average, I'd say that I tended to work out about 5 to 6 times a week, and this really just was my usual style of training. The main differences were just that I was focusing on running more than I normally would, and also I was focusing on the HYROX exercises, most of which I normally wouldn't be including in my day-to-day workouts. If you'd like to build your own hybrid training split, I'd encourage you to listen to episode 14, which is my ultimate guide to hybrid athlete training. And also be sure to grab my free hybrid training guide, which will be linked in the description. So that was my typical split. Now I'll get into a little bit more detail for what the full body conditioning, weightlifting, and cardio workouts look like. We'll start with full body conditioning. So like I said, these workouts were done with Joya, and we committed to working out together once a week during the training period. Training together and having this shared goal was huge. Having the accountability was so important, and it was also so much more fun to train together versus training solo. And really, one of my main takeaways from this whole experience was just the importance of having an accountability buddy and working toward this goal, which was a challenging goal, working toward it together, because yes, we could have done it alone, but in my opinion, it was so much more of a positive experience doing this together. One type of full body conditioning workout that we would do would be a HYROX trial. So Joya had the brilliant idea, and I say that kind of sarcastically, but it actually ended up being a really good idea. But she had the idea to do a full-on trial of the HYROX race once a month. So we would end up doing 3 trials in the 3 months leading up to the race. We made sure to plan these in advance and schedule them in our calendars. And we mainly did these on the weekends just because it gave us more time to actually do a full proper run through of the race. This ended up being a really great way to gauge our baseline fitness in the first trial and then track our progress every month after that. And this was probably one of my favorite parts of the training experience. I actually really enjoyed and looked forward to the trials. Unlike many of the solo weightlifting workouts, which, spoiler alert, I ended up not loving as the time went on. So if you are planning to train for HYROX, I would recommend that you do these trials as well, because it really helps to simulate the race, and it also helps you to practice transitioning between running and each of the exercises. So in our very first trial, it was a baseline test in July. It was with myself and with Joya, and we did this without any prior HYROX training. And I personally did it without any prior HYROX research either, aside from looking at the list of exercises that were listed on their website. So we just kind of showed up. We were intimidated, at least I was intimidated, but we were committed to completing it. And we went into it with a no pressure mentality. We could take as long as we needed. We just wanted to see if we were actually capable of completing the HYROX race at this point. And so we ran through it. We ended up completing it in 2.5 hours, which included setting up each of the exercises, looking at our phones to see what the weights were for each of the exercises, and also taking many breaks throughout. And this 2.5 hour workout probably was my longest workout ever. We definitely ran at a slow pace. So we were running about 8 minutes per kilometer. And we also weren't using the regulation plate. So for example, with the sled push, maybe we only loaded one plate on when we maybe should have been loading on more in terms of the regulation weights that we would end up using on race day. Through this experience, we definitely surprised ourselves. I wasn't fully confident that we were going to be able to complete it, but it was really reassuring and it helped to boost our confidence early on that this was a realistic goal that we would be able to accomplish. It also helped us to mentally prepare for our upcoming training and also get excited for this new goal. Through this experience, we learned that we needed to specifically focus on increasing our running speed as well as increasing our strength on each of the different exercises. Moving on to trial number 2, this was done 1 month later at the beginning of August, and this time Joya and I did the trial alongside John and Luca. And it was motivating to train as a team with all 4 of us. This time around, we were much faster than trial number 1. Although we didn't time it, it definitely didn't take us 2.5 hours that time. And I found that the first few kilometers and obstacles were difficult, but I definitely experienced the runner's high on this day after the first few kilometers, which was really exciting. We did see a lot of improvement because at this point we'd been training for a month already, meaning we had become more familiar with the different exercises and how to set them up more efficiently. It was also more of a team effort because we had 4 people to set up the equipment versus only 2 people. And we were also much more strategic this time around in terms of splitting up the distance with each of the exercises. So overall, it was very encouraging to see that we had improved so much. It was a lot of fun, and we ended up celebrating completing our trial with a pool day. And then trial number 3, this was in September. This was just with Joya and I. I don't have too much to share about this one, but we completed this trial in 1 hour and 45 minutes. And again, it was just really encouraging to see that we had progressively improved each month with each trial, and the running and the exercises were becoming progressively easier. They were still challenging, but much easier than the first time we did them. So aside from these monthly trials, Joya and I also did weekly full body conditioning workouts together. And the vibe was that we would just sort of show up at the gym together and then do some sort of full body workout together. It usually involves some sort of circuit training, and we would incorporate running, the HYROX exercises, and then we would also get creative and incorporate other exercises as well. On some days, some of our other friends would join as well. We had up to 4 people training together, and this was a lot of fun. It was perfect for the circuit style training workouts, and it really felt like we had created our own group fitness class. Something else that we did during the training period was we tried out F45 classes for the first time. So we did 1 strength workout and 1 cardio workout. And these workouts actually included some HYROX exercises, which was great. Overall, these full body conditioning workouts were a lot of fun while also getting a challenging workout in and cheering each other on, motivating each other all throughout the way. In terms of my weightlifting workouts, like I said, I would complete these at the gym. I would usually do 1 upper body and 1 lower body day. I would usually do it by myself, and I wasn't following a specific program. I was really just searching up workouts on Instagram, and then I would add a couple HYROX moves to the end of the workout. I honestly didn't love these workouts, and after a while, I got really bored of the HYROX exercises, and I also wasn't motivated, and I did gradually do less and less of the HYROX training. And not gonna lie, I've kind of been in a rut with my workouts most of this year, actually, ever since quitting that program at the beginning of April, I want to say. I haven't been very motivated to go to the gym. I have been continuing to go to the gym, but full transparency, I haven't been super excited to go to the gym every time that I have been going. I will say having the goal of HYROX did help a bit, and it really motivated me, especially for the first month of training, but that did fizzle out after a while. So the weightlifting workouts, they really were nothing special. I really wasn't that excited about them, and I really fell off with doing the HYROX moves at the end of the workout, especially in the last month leading up to the race. But I'm just being honest, that's what my experience was like. Maybe it would be different for you. On some days, I did do these weightlifting workouts with one of my other friends. And on these days, we would follow along to the program that she's currently following, which is on the Ladder app, which, by the way, that's currently the app that I am going to be using, and I'm excited to share my experience training with the Ladder app in a future episode. But yeah, we would follow one of her workouts, and then sometimes we would add 2 HYROX exercises at the end. In terms of cardio training throughout the summer, like I said, I was playing soccer once a week, meaning that I was getting some sort of cardio workout in at least once a week throughout the summer. And yes, soccer is a pretty intense cardio workout, according to my perception of it, and also according to my Fitbit stats. And then in addition to playing soccer, I also did some intentional running training. So I didn't really do any training where I was just solely focusing on running, but I usually just added this to the end of my weightlifting sessions. So I would either do steady state training where I just ran at a steady pace for about 10 to 15 minutes on the automatic treadmill. And then sometimes I did sprint training where I did intervals of, let's say, 15 seconds on, 45 seconds off, and then repeat that for about 10-ish minutes. And I did that on the manual treadmill. And I actually really enjoyed doing the sprint training, and this is something that I want to incorporate going forward. It was nice to add this running on to the end of my weightlifting sessions and get in a nice sweat, but like I said, I didn't really do any running specific sessions for the most part. We also sometimes included running in our full body conditioning workouts. For example, we would include running in one of our circuits where we're doing 3 exercises. 2 of them were HYROX moves, and the third one was running around the track. The last thing I did was a 5-kilometer race in September, which was helpful to get a gauge of what my endurance was like at that point in my training. Aside from the actual physical training component, a big part of the training process was understanding strategies and rules for HYROX. It turns out that there's many different ways to get time penalties and a few different ways to actually get disqualified from the race. And these rules are very easy to follow once you know them, but they're also very easy to break if you aren't aware of them. So it is absolutely essential that you are familiar with the rules while training for and actually competing in your first HYROX race. Before I signed up for the race, I didn't know anything and I didn't really research the rules at all. So throughout the training process, there were a variety of different ways that I learned about the different HYROX rules. The first way was through Joya, because unlike me, Joya actually did a lot of background research and read the rule book from the get-go, which was helpful. And she often shared different rules and strategies with me throughout our training sessions together. The next way I learned about these rules were through Instagram Reels. So Joya ended up on the HYROX side of the Instagram algorithm, which again was super helpful. And she would share several Instagram Reels with me every week. So just so you're aware, there's tons of HYROX content out there. And so if you have questions about pretty much anything when it comes to the race, there should be something out there to answer your question. And then the last 2 ways I learned about the HYROX rules, I didn't do until the day before the race. So one way was reading the rule book. Now, by that point, since it was just one day before the race, it was pretty much just a refresher on the rules since I had already learned so much from Joya and from the Instagram Reels that she was sending me. I would say that I recommend you read the rule book earlier than I did, but don't necessarily read it right at the beginning. Do it after you have at least a few weeks of training. So that way, by that point, you would have had some experience practicing the different exercises and you would be more familiar with the terminology used in the rulebook. In terms of the technical briefing, this was extremely helpful and it provided a visual of all of the different HYROX moves and it was coming directly from HYROX itself. I would say it was a huge mistake that I waited until the day before the race to view the technical briefing, because this is something that I should have watched before I even started my training to get familiar with all of the different rules. I'll be sure to link the technical briefing from the 2024 season below, so that way you can see exactly what is required coming from HYROX itself. Moving on to training tips. I'll start by providing some overall training tips. The first tip is to simply practice the exercises. It's important to get familiar with all of the different exercises and also learn proper form, especially proper form for exercises that you aren't familiar with already. For example, for me, the ski erg was the exercise that I was probably least familiar with out of all 8. Like I said, there are lots of resources out there available to help you with this, and I would also encourage you to ask anyone who you're training with for feedback on your form. Another tip is to train with heavier weights than the weights that you will actually be competing with on race day. So that way, when it comes to race day, it will feel much easier. This is honestly something I avoided. It's something that my partners definitely recommended to me, but I just wasn't down because, like I said, by the end, I just wasn't even down to be doing the HYROX exercises, let alone heavier versions of them. But looking back, I should have done this more intentionally. So that way, by the time race day came around, it was much easier for me to pull the sled pull, for example. Another tip is to focus on your weaknesses. So out of the 8 different exercises, I'm sure there's some that you are already more proficient in and some that don't come quite as easily to you. And so focus on those ones. And again, this isn't necessarily something I did. I found rowing to be easy, and so I often found myself practicing rowing, whereas I should have been practicing the burpee broad jumps or the sled pull, things that I wasn't as strong in. So don't make the same mistake as me and focus on training for your weaknesses. So that way they can become strengths or at least become less weak. Another tip is to be creative if you don't have access to the right equipment. This is one of the questions that I got on Instagram, and it was, How do you train for the exercises if you don't have access to the proper equipment? My main tip would be to consider finding some way to access this equipment at least once during your training, whether it's attending some sort of group fitness class that offers HYROX equipment or using a guest pass at a gym that has HYROX equipment. But there are also lots of ways that you can modify the exercises, and I'll explain those coming up when I dive into the specific training tips for each exercise. And the last training tip is to practice race day strategies. So how you intend to strategize for completing the race. I won't get into specific race day strategies today, but I'll be sure to mention this in the next episode. Moving on to some more specific tips for each of the different exercises, starting with running. I would recommend that you include a variety of types of running training, including both steady state training as well as sprint training. And I really recommend running outdoors or on a track or on an automatic treadmill when practicing your steady state running versus on a manual treadmill, because this makes it so much easier. Remember when I said it took us 8 minutes to run a kilometer in our first ever trial? I really think, yes, we weren't quite as strong as running at that point, but we also ran on a manual treadmill, and that made it a lot harder. And I would say if you want to enjoy your running, I definitely found running around a track much more enjoyable than running on the treadmill. Ski erg tips. This is not a common piece of equipment and many gyms might not have it. I know my gym didn't have a ski erg. And so if you don't have access to a ski erg, there are some different ways you can simulate this movement. One is by strapping a resistance band onto a pull-up bar, and then you're sort of doing the ski erg movement, but using a resistance band. So it's not the same, but it's kind of similar. And then another way you could simulate is with one of those rope pull machines. Again, it's not the same, but it's similar-ish. But I would say seek out a gym to practice with the ski erg at least once. For example, I went to John's gym on a guest pass and practiced there. I also went to the F45 class and they had ski erg, so I got to practice there. And this was a much more accurate experience to help prepare me for what to expect on race day. And this isn't necessarily a training tip, but it's kind of a form tip, something that I came across in many of the Instagram reels that I watched. It was to reach as high as you possibly can, get up onto your toes, and then pull down the ski erg handles, and bend down as low as you possibly can to really maximize your distance. With the sled push, you want to be taking strong, powerful strides. Figure out where you want to grip the sled and where you're going to place your body. This is personal preference, so play around with it and figure out what works best for you. If you don't have access to a sled, one way to simulate a sled pull would be to use a manual treadmill and walk on the treadmill and push against the handles while doing this. For the sled pull, there's a lot of different ways that you can pull the rope. So again, practice different strategies and pick what works best for you. Make sure to stay pretty low and keep your knees bent throughout to really lower your center of gravity and keep you stable. Be prepared for this to feel much harder on race day than it does while practicing. I know this is something I personally experienced, and it's something many other people have experienced as well. I'm foreshadowing a little bit for the next episode. If you don't have access to a sled, it is a little bit more difficult to simulate a sled pull, but there are other exercises you could do to train similar muscles. And I did see some people would practice a sled pull by pulling a tire instead. So if you have a tire but not a sled, that's one option. But you can look up some different options online. And then a training tip for the sled pull and the sled push would be to train these exercises together. So let's say you push the sled from one end of the turf to the other, and then you already have the rope set up, so that way, instead of pushing it back in the direction you just came from, you pull it. So it's sort of supersetting the sled pull and push. Next, burpee broad jumps. Everyone's least favorite exercise, at least what I've come across. I actually thought I liked these at the beginning and I thought they would be one of my strengths, but no, I quickly learned that was not the case. Some tips for this exercise: if you need a rest, instead of resting at the top before your jump, do so while you are down on the ground. Try to jump as far as you possibly can with the broad jump to really maximize your distance and limit the amount of times that you need to jump. And then on days where you're feeling a little bit lower energy or less motivated, there are lots of modifications to doing a full-on burpee broad jump, but one option would be to do hand release push-ups. With this exercise, just practice and find a rhythm that works best for you. And I will say that in terms of the race day order, getting to the burpee broad jump station really is the hardest, and then it does tend to get a little bit easier from there, at least from my experience. Rowing. This is something that's very easy to integrate into your workout routine, and it is easy to set up. This is probably my most commonly practiced HYROX exercise. Make sure you familiarize yourself with the different resistance levels and find the resistance level that feels most comfortable for you. Also practice strapping in and out of the row machine to help be more efficient on race day. You want to make sure that you're practicing proper, efficient rowing technique and really getting that full range of motion to help maximize the distance that you're pulling with each row. And if you don't have access to a row machine, although I think most gyms have one of these, you could do some barbell or dumbbell row exercises instead. For the farmer's carries, I'll share some do's and don'ts, starting with the don'ts. Don't practice your farmer's carries on the treadmill. I did this a handful of times because I didn't have a large space to walk back and forth for the farmer's carries, but I really don't recommend this. And I especially don't recommend doing this with the automatic treadmill because that is actually dangerous and it can be quite difficult to stop the machine, drop the weights without falling off the treadmill. So just don't do that. Don't even mess with that. What you should do is just find a clear space. Even if it's a short distance, just walk the length, put down the kettlebells, turn around, pick them up, and then walk in the opposite direction. And as a bonus, this helps you get practice with dropping and picking up the weights, which is something that you'll have to do on race day anyways. Another tip is to grip the kettlebell at the front of the handle. Personally, I found this to help improve my grip. And if you can, practice running with the kettlebells rather than walking. I never practiced running and then I ran on race day. So it would have been helpful if I would have practiced that move while running during my training. For the sandbag lunges, you can train by practicing different lunge variations. There are so many different types. Make sure that your knee hits the ground on every rep. I know that this isn't necessarily common practice. At least in the past, I've heard that that's not proper form. But for HYROX rules, you need to hit your knee after every rep. So train accordingly to help prepare yourself. Also make sure that if you are doing the doubles, that you're practicing the strategy for passing off the sandbag to your partner. Because if you drop the sandbag twice, I'm pretty sure you get disqualified from the race, which is not something that you want. If you don't have access to a sandbag at the gym, you can just use some other form of weights like dumbbells or a barbell. That's what I had to do. But we did have an opportunity to practice the sandbag transfer when we went to the F45 class because they had sandbags there, which was helpful just to get that experience and learn. Lastly, wall balls. For this exercise, the medicine balls that are used in the actual race are the larger, less bouncy medicine balls. Now, if you don't have access to those, you can still use the smaller, bouncier medicine balls. They still work. Or if you don't have any medicine balls, another simulation could be to do overhead presses with dumbbells. Make sure to catch the ball at chest level rather than at your face because you might hit yourself in the face, and I learned that the hard way. Practice by hitting a target rather than just throwing it up and hitting a wall, because on race day, you will be required to hit a target. And also ensure that when you are doing each rep, you are hitting full squat depth, so 90 degrees after every rep, because otherwise it won't count as a rep. Wrapping things up with our community questions. I asked you over on Instagram questions about your experience training for HYROX. And the first question I asked was, have you trained for a HYROX race before? 33% of you said, yes, I've trained in the past. 7% of you said, yes, I'm currently training. 47% of you said, no, but I'd like to. And 13% of you said, no, and I don't intend to. So we have quite the range in responses here. For anyone who's interested in training, I'm so excited for you to start your training journey, and I hope you found this episode helpful to guide your future training. If you're currently training, you've got this, keep it up. And if you have trained in the past, I'm wondering, are you planning on training again at some point in the future? And if you are one of the people who said you don't intend to train, maybe this episode will have changed your mind because you'll realize that it's not as bad as everything makes it seem. Next question. Which of the following is your favorite HYROX exercise? 41% of you said sled push, and that would have to be my favorite exercise as well. 35% said wall balls. 18% said sandbag lunges. And 6% of you said the dreaded burpee broad jumps. And I'm not surprised that that one came in last. Next, I asked you how confident you feel in your ability to train for a HYROX race. I asked this on a scale ranging from not confident at all to very confident. And the average response was right in the middle at somewhat confident. There were responses at all ends of the scale. I'd say about a third of you said not confident at all. a third of you said very confident, and a third of you were right in the middle. And hopefully, as always, you're feeling much more confident after listening to today's episode that training for a HYROX race is something that you are indeed capable of doing. Next, I asked, what questions do you have about training for a HYROX race? I've already answered a couple of these throughout the episode, and then the other questions that were asked. First, did you study anything that wasn't on the test, aka anything that was a waste of time training? And I thought about this, and I would say not really. Everything I trained had some sort of outcome or helped me to learn something along the way. And if anything, I would say I didn't study enough for this test, especially when it came to the running. So no, I didn't do too much. If anything, I just didn't do enough. The next question was how to properly train and rest the week before and fuel for the race. This is something that I will be answering in part 2, which is all about the week before race day and race day itself. The last question, how did you gather so much HYROX training content? And of course, this question was asked by my partner Joya, so shout out to her for constantly flooding my DMs with tons of HYROX content because it really was actually so helpful to help me learn about different strategies, rules, and training techniques. The last question I asked was, what advice would you have for beginners who are training for their first HYROX race? So this was intended more so for people who have already trained for HYROX. The first piece of advice, and this comes from my friend who initially inspired me to sign up for HYROX. She said, advice I would give is to train running more than the other exercises. And I 100% agree. The main thing that I would have done differently if I were to train again for another HYROX would be to focus more on running because this really was my biggest weakness and the area where we were slowest on race day, not to mention what felt like the most difficult element of the race. And the last piece of advice, which comes from Luca, is to train your legs for endurance. I completely agree. The obstacles really do take a toll on your legs, and then you just have to go right back into running. So it is very draining, and your legs need to be prepared to be able to endure all of this intense exercise over the course of the race. So training for endurance is key. And one way that I would recommend doing this is by doing the HYROX trials like we did. So that way you can actually practice and simulate what it would be like to keep up with the endurance required on race day. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you're feeling expired. I hope you're feeling inspired to train for and compete in your first HYROX. You absolutely can do it if you set this goal and set your mind to training for it. If you have any questions, I will answer all of your questions. So please leave a comment on the YouTube channel, on Spotify, or you can DM me on Instagram and share this episode to help your HYROX training partner or to propose to someone that you would like them to be your HYROX training partner. And if you haven't already, be sure to listen to episode 14 of the podcast next, which is all about how to train like a hybrid athlete. I'll see you in part 2 of this series. Bye, everyone.